Thank you. Thank you for appearing here today. Can an enterprise agreement remove all applicable award entitlements? Yes or no? It's not a trick question.
Is no.
No, that's right. Can an enterprise agreement remove the entitlements that the Fair Work Act and the National Employment Standards provide employees?
No, is there.
Can an employment contract or letter of offer remove legal minimum entitlements?
The extent of the information that I could provide today relates to the functions of the Fair Work Commission. It's discharging its obligations under the Fair Work Act. I'm not too sure if I can actually answer that question because it goes to common law.
A letter of offer or of employment from an employer to a prospective employee cannot undermine national employment standards.
Statutory minimum stand.
Or the award.
Yes.
Thank you. If an enterprise agreement is terminated by the Fair Work Commission and those employees covered by that enterprise agreement are then deemed to be covered by the applicable award, how can those employees be owed money under the applicable award if the Fair Work Commission approved that agreement at that time?
There are a number of things I have to go through here, Senator. One of the primary elements of making or the Commission approving an enterprise agreement is to ensure that it meets the Better Off Overall test. And the Better Off Overall test, as applied since the commencement of the Fair Work Act, has evolved with evolving case law. But in essence, the test applies at the point or the time that the agreement has been made. So an agreement that was made, say in 2007, 2008, under that legislative regime at that point in time, may not satisfy the Better Off Overall test if it was applied now.
But that would be recognised in the law, wouldn't it? So there wouldn't be any back pay involved then. If that was the agreement at the time, there wouldn't be any back pay. But here I'm talking about someone who's had their enterprise agreement cancelled by the Fair Work Commission and then being entitled to back pay. That would indicate that it's inferior.
It depends on, and it's fair. It's hard to talk in the abstract about this. But if that enterprise agreement contained, say, a loaded rate or compensated for penalty rates that may have otherwise applied under the award, and the minimum rate obviously has to still be at least equal to or more than the minimum wage, essentially. But the penalty rates are things that sit outside of that minimum entitlement. So in certain circumstances, the one that you've just raised, an employee, after a termination of an enterprise agreement, particularly one that was made a very long time ago with loaded rates essentially, may not contain, and depending on the shift patterns of the employees, if they're working weekends, public holidays, things of that nature, may not compensate them for the patterns of work that they do.
So I see what you're getting at with loaded rates or different penalty rates in the enterprise agreement compared with the award. But wouldn't that, while ever the enterprise agreement was in place, that person wouldn't be entitled to extra back pay? Surely.
No, because the
agreement was struck.
Yes, and that agreement provides the terms and conditions.
Right.
Of their.
So we agree on that. So how could someone whose enterprise agreement is terminated then be entitled to back pay unless it was inferior to the award?
I think I've just tried to explain.
No, I get it, Mr. Furlong. But if we have an award in place, enterprise agreement comes along, it's better than the award, but some of the penalty rates may be different, or loaded rates may be different. Then once that enterprise agreement is removed, that person wouldn't be entitled to back pay because they were working under a legitimate legal contract, right, or employment scheme. So why would they get back pay unless it was inferior to the award?
In certain circumstances, depending on the legislative regime that was in place when the agreement was made. In my time in industrial relations, there's the no disadvantage test. There's a period where there was no test. There's the fairness test.
Been a lot of tests, haven't there?
And then the Better Off Overall test. But the agreement, when it is struck, is applied against the test. The test that applied at that point in time. So why that agreement, that industrial instrument, enterprise agreement still operates. It may not, apart from the minimum rate of pay, may not provide for exactly the same or better entitlements than would have been provided for under one award.
Yes, but I accept what you're saying, in that would be the case while the enterprise agreement. If the enterprise agreement is in place, then it takes precedence over the award.
Yes.
But once the enterprise agreement is cancelled by the Fair Work Commission, the award would take precedence. So why would there be any back pay? Because they were working legally under the enterprise agreement.
It's essentially what you're asking, Senator, is a legal question. It's not my role to interpret the legislation. If you wish, I can take these questions on notice. But it's very difficult to provide information.
We're dealing in abstracts.
And a hypothetical.
In a hypothetical. So let's get to a concrete one. An enterprise agreement must pay more than the applicable award for the agreement to be passed, correct?
The better off overall test.
Yes. Okay. This clearly was not the case in the one key case, as the federal court ruled that union member employees were back paid by court order and non-union members were back paid by fair entitlements guarantee. How did this happen, and why has this not been applied to other labour hire companies with coal mining employees who are paid less than the legal minimum that the Award and Fair Work Act and National Employment Standards provides employees?
If I might start here by, if an agreement has reached its nominal expiry date, an employee or representative of an employee can make an application to the Fair Work Commission to have that agreement terminated. And if that application is made, there's a test, I think it's section 225, I think deals with agreements that expired and the termination of them. There are a number of things that a member of the Commission has to consider. One of them is that it's the public interest not to terminate it. Another one is the impact that it's going to have on employees. From some initial sort of some cursory analysis that we've done, the vast majority of these applications to terminate agreements are uncontested. So that is one option that's available.
But why would the federal court rule that union member employees should be back paid by court order and non-union members were back paid by fair entitlements guarantee?
Essentially, the decision of the federal court in the one key case stands for itself. I certainly can't comment on the reasoning of a full bench of the federal court.
How can a CFMEU negotiated and endorsed enterprise agreement that did not allow any input and involvement from the employees who this enterprise agreement would go on to cover, remove all those listed legal minimum entitlements, and then Fair Work Act and National Employment Standards entitlements be approved by the Fair Work Commission?
Once again, I can't talk in the abstract. I'm not too sure.
Can we get you some material?
Certainly.
Okay. Okay, we'll get that to you. Minister, I have some questions for you. The primary workplace relationship is that of the employee-employer with representatives allowed for either party. Would you agree?
Oh, I guess in general terms, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
There's obviously a range
The lawyer in you says general terms.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's obviously a range of different workplace relationships beyond employee-employer.
Yeah.
There's independent contractors. There's a whole bunch of other things. But fortunately, the majority is still of that nature.
Yeah, okay. I'm not trying to trap you.
No.
Minister.
I just want to make sure I'm giving accurate answers, that's all.
Thank you. After graduation, I worked at the coalface around Australia, then management and leadership. So I've seen industrial relations from both perspectives. Australia's history in workplace relations is one of adversarial approaches, conflict and conflict resolution, gamesmanship, power steps. We've even had, Sally McManus, but I'm not calling her out. We've had industrial groups, we've had union bosses, we've had employer bodies talking about power. And the power is brought largely by industrial legislation. Would you agree?
Well, I think certainly there are power relationships in in workplace environments, and depending on the laws that we have at any one time, they can be weighted one way or another.
Yeah.
But there's definitely power relationships, if that's what you...
And that's how unions started, because there was an imbalance of power in the first place.
Yeah.
Until people started to work together and then form a union. So
Yeah, it's that idea of, you're more powerful being with other people than on your own.
Yep. In central Queensland and Hunter Valley, there have been miners there who have suffered under a system which the IR Club wins regardless, while the system does not serve workers or small businesses. Now, I brought this up with the previous Liberal National Party government, and initially the LNP was silent, but later on Senator Cash did her bit to enact or to implement an agreement that we came to her, an understanding we came to her with regard to investigating the abuse and exploitation of miners in central Queensland and the Hunter Valley particularly. So Labor MPs, though, dishonestly diverted and hid the truth and the exploitation of miners, affecting their pay seriously, safety, workers' compensation. I mean, workers' compensation is enshrined in legislation, but it was bypassed.
Well, can I just say, Senator Roberts, I'd have to pick you up on that. I don't think anyone who has observed the work that I've done, that any number of other federal Labor MPs and senators
Mr.
have
Joel
done.
Fitzgibbon and the current Dan Rapicoli have tried to smear me and imply that there's nothing wrong with the Hunter Valley when there is.
Oh no, I think I've seen both Joel Fitzgibbon and Dan Rapicoli make many public statements about the need for changes to the law to protect coal miners. Dan Rapicoli is a long-term member of the miners' union. He was a coal miner before he was elected. Joel's support for the coal industry and coal workers is well known. So I've seen them over many years try to convince Senator Cash and her colleagues that we needed to change the law to protect coal miners, and unfortunately that never happened.
Minister, when I first started finding out what was going on in the Hunter Valley, the abuse and exploitation, I've made that clear and public. And Mr. Fitzgibbon came out and said, well, I'm pleased that Senator Roberts has woken up to the casual rort, which I exposed as well. But as for the rest of the stuff with the CFMU, no, not true. That's what he did. That's what he said. He smeared me because of that. And Dan Rapicoli has also misled people into thinking that there's no problem other than casuals. We have got serious problems in the Hunter Valley. So my question is, instead of the patchwork of Band-Aids on Band-Aids and continually adding complexity, isn't it time to reform industrial relations comprehensively and bring it back to something basic for the employer-employee relationship?
I completely agree that we need to fundamentally reform workplace laws, and that's, I guess, what we're trying to do with the laws that are currently before the House of Reps. I'd be very happy to talk with you about why those laws are important, and hopefully in that way gain your support for those laws when they come to the Senate. I'm not sure if you were here when we had a discussion about this yesterday, Senator Roberts, but it's not as if this bill that we've got before the Parliament at the moment is the entire set of changes that workplace laws need, and the issues around same job, same pay that I think you're familiar with, particularly in the coal industry, aren't being dealt with in this particular bill, but it's the government's intention to deal with them in a future piece of legislation. But look, I'd love to think that you would support our overhaul of the industrial laws with this bill that we've got.
I'll support anything.
Senator Roberts, just want to give you a heads up. We're going in 15-minute cycles, so there's another 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I'm happy to talk with you, Senator Watt.
Sure, that'd be great.
What I see, though, is an attempt by myself to make equal pay received for equal work. I see that as a last resort on my part after trying to work with employers, employer groups who are neglecting what's going on in the Hunter Valley, and some of their own members are abusing. Complicit with the CFMEU in the Hunter Valley. They are exploiting miners. So in frustration, I said, let's make sure that we've got equal pay for equal work. But that's an added complexity. In this case, in my view, it's better than having the abuse and exploitation of miners continuing, because the employers clearly are not interested. Most employers clearly are not interested in solving this. So instead of simplifying things, I'm going to add to the complexity if my bill is passed. But instead of a patchwork of what I'm trying to say, Senator Watson, instead of a patchwork of third-party overseers and a myriad of rules that people play games around, especially people with deep pockets like union bosses and employer groups with deep legal pockets, couldn't we get back to the basics with, for example, just a very basic worker and employee protections, rights and entitlements, instead of a 650-page document, just a 20-page document with severe penalties for those who breach those provisions?
Well, I think I'm not sure that you'd necessarily be able to cover every, potential workplace
Well, that's my
issue.
point. I don't think anyone can. And
No.
the Fair Work Act has attempted to do that, and it's now a patchwork. It's a mess.
Well, that's actually one of the reasons for the government seeking to introduce some form of multi-employer bargaining, especially for low-paid workers, because you'd be familiar, Senator Roberts, from your discussions with small business owners, that the complexity they experience in having to come up with individual agreements with their employees, whether it be 5 people in a shop or 20 people in a small manufacturing outfit or something like that. There's a lot of feedback that we've received from smaller businesses that they would appreciate being able to be part of a broader system that is negotiated by a bunch of smaller businesses with similar types of workers, similar types of workplaces. That's exactly what multi-employer bargaining is about, is trying to help reduce that complexity for employers rather than having to have their own HR teams.
That's one of the many provisions in your bill. I'm not talking about your bill.
I'm just giving an example.
I'm not talking about your bill, not saying whether it's
Final
good or bad or
question,
different.
Senator Roberts.
What I am saying is that the complexity enables those with deep legal pockets to get around those complexities, to do whatever they want. Meanwhile, the worker is not protected, as I've shown in the Hunter Valley, is decimated by a union, by their union, and by unscrupulous employers. What I'm saying is, if we cleared all the crap and just got down to something basic and simple that entrenches the workplace relationship sanctity, and then had severe repercussions for people who willingly or deliberately broke those conditions, then I think that would be a far better way to go than having at the moment people able to willy-nilly get around the myriad of provisions.
Yeah, look, I think in general terms I can agree that the simpler the laws are, the better.
Can we say that's a first?
That we agree? Oh, we've agreed on a few things over the years. I'll never forget that time we that we jump-started a minivan in where was it? Northern Territory, I think it was.
Mount Isa?
But so in general terms, I agree. I guess one of the things I would disagree with is that I don't think that the miners' union of all unions could be accused of selling out their members.
I never would have thought so until the last 3 years. Now I'm convinced.
Well,
not the miners' union, the Hunter Valley branch of the miners' union.
Well, yeah, I think the miners' union of all unions has a long history of securing very good
That's why I
wages
was
and
stunned to
conditions for
see
their
them
members.
complicit. I was stunned.
It's the de-unionisation of that industry, I think, that has led to some of the labour hire issues and the casualisation laws and things like that. So, but look, in general terms, of course, we'd like to have laws as simple as possible, but unfortunately, in the real world, sometimes they need to be a bit more complex.
So I just put it.
I'll move the call to.
Sorry?
It's time
Okay.
for the call to go over to.